My name is Cameron Collins. I am a revenue operations strategist with RevPartners, and I'm the community admin for the Sprocketeer community of HubSpot admin.
I'm Mark Lerner. I'm the Director of Growth Marketing at DealHub. We are a CPQ solution native integration with HubSpot and happy member of the Sprocketeer community and really love being the co-host of this. So it's been a lot of fun.
Yeah, I think it's worth going back to really the inception of this podcast because here we are many weeks later, 23 episodes in, and you and I had met at Inbound. And I remember before Inbound, I was doing all the research and looking online, and I saw someone say the magic happens in the hallways. And I thought that was a phrase for a cool private only event at Inbound. Oh, there's an event called In the Hallways or something. And the reality turned out to be even better, which was just it was someone saying the best things happen outside of the speakers and the actual live sessions.
Sure.
And that's true. Met wonderful people just like yourself and so many amazing Sprocketeers this last year.
Yeah, I host DealHub's podcast, and I had only recently joined the company when I went to Inbound. So I recorded like 6 or 7 episodes in the hallways, literally, you being one of them, for that podcast as like a kind of kickoff of the new season. And from those relationships, I've gotten to know a whole bunch of people and that I still stay in touch with today. And yeah, I'm really looking forward to Inbound this year. I know that we've all put in for sessions. I think Deal Hub is definitely doing one of the larger sessions, as well as we're on a standby for one of the ones we pitched. So we'll see how that goes.
Yeah, and I know that my talks were not accepted. That's okay. I've got my platform here and I will live with that. But there are so many amazing people in the community that have had their talks accepted. I know Rev Partners have, we've got some people that are on standby. I know other just friends in the community that have had their talks accepted. And so, really, I think the thing that excites me the most about going into Inbound this year is all of the relationships that I've built and that we've built as a community. I can only really speak from my perspective, but seeing all of the people talking in all of our threads every day, that's really special. I don't recall, but I think, Mark, correct me if I'm wrong. I don't think we were on Slack at the time when we were at
No,
Inbound, or we
no,
might have still been in Discord.
it was Discord to see. Yeah, I remember when we talked about the idea of potentially moving to Slack, and I helped convinced to push that forward just because like personally I Discord is just another thing I would have to have open that I don't want to have open. Um, so it's a little self-centered of me, but I'm glad it happened. I think it's been a really great change.
And that's where I think for a lot of people coming to Inbound this year, and really I can only speak for myself as a proponent of the community, but my vision for Sprocketeer in really an intangible sense is to have people who can come to Inbound and feel like they're connecting with friends and feel like they're connecting with people that they've known for a long while. There's a lot of people in the community that even I don't really talk to on maybe a regular basis like you and I do, but I feel like I know a lot of you very closely just by seeing all your comments and the way that we all interact and engage and help one another. What events we'll end up doing as a Sprocketeer community by the time the Inbound rolls around, very for the notion of everyone getting together and having familiar faces, especially for those who maybe in the past you've gone to Inbound and you didn't really have people that you could connect with. And so I know that can feel very isolating, even when you're in a sea of people.
Yeah, but regardless, I'm assuming there will be bright orange socks again this year and bright orange suit.
We'll have lots of orange. This actually was a shirt that I purchased for Inbound, and I was going to kick myself if I only wore it that one day. Here we are. Now it's my uniform for the Sprocket Pod,
Were
and
you allowed to expense it?
I did not expense it. I probably could have. I have a whole wardrobe of items, including actually Sprocket Pod swag that's coming in. I put my ventures on my dime, but that's building my brand in a way, so I'm okay with this.
All right, cool.
With that in mind, though, we've really grown our audience on this podcast just in terms of the people listening, looking at the numbers. We've got agency owners who tune in, we've got HubSpot admin who listen. And one of the things that have been really cool has been really just building a platform that allows us to get thoughts and opinions of various members of the community out into the open. One of the things that I had been chatting about recently with Deanna Gloff is that being a HubSpot admin can be a very binary role where you go to work every day and you build stuff. And one of the things that you and I have talked about, Mark, is that a lot of the top tiered admin, they are also revenue operations professionals. They're strategic. And one of the things that I appreciate about our conversations is the ability to allow people to vocalize their opinions and their perspectives in what's happening in the industry, as opposed to I'm using HubSpot. It's a software, it's a job. Because it really is a special thing. It's a tool that helps people build their businesses. And I know you've had some amazing conversations with a lot of people in the space and across various industries as well.
Yeah, it's a, you know what? I would say broadly, doing podcasts is a super life hack for learning because you get to sit with people who know stuff that you don't, and you just get to ask them questions for an hour. And doing that time over and over again, A, it's a muscle that you start to get stronger and you get better at it. And B, you learn all this stuff. It's like really having your finger on the pulse of what's going on. And yeah, I've had a really great opportunity to watch trends happen as they're happening. And I think you and I brought those insights into the conversations here to bounce them off of our guests to see if they resonate. But yeah, we can talk through some of the ones that that I've seen, that I'm observing, and how I think that that's going to impact our community here, RevOps broadly, and the economy as a whole, and people in it.
Yeah, a few recurring themes that I know have come up on our show.
Yeah.
And one of the ones that I know you are far above and beyond an expert in over myself is the area of artificial intelligence. And I still think it's amazing. And the strides, even since we've started doing this podcast, have been leaps and bounds from where we were at from episode one. And we were talking about it then and hypothesizing on all the things that HubSpot would do with AI and how it would impact the industry as a whole. But I know one of the first questions that I'd asked was, is this hype and buzz, or is this here to stay? Now, obviously, artificial intelligence isn't going away, but what I'm curious about all these months later, from your perspective, Mark, is are people still talking about it as fervently as they were 6+ months ago? Or is it now the silent majority that are using it, if you will?
So again, I don't have the hard and fast data, though I've seen things pop up to speak to this, but it's definitely less people hyping it than it was. I think that within the first 12 months after ChatGPT 3 kind of blew up, which was basically OpenAI had been laboring before that, but they never had a chat user interface for their API. And when they released it, which was really, I don't think they realized how impactful that was going to be. I don't think they realized what was going to happen. But once they released it, normal people who don't use APIs were able to interact with it and saw something. I think I also saw it. We're staring right into the future. In the aftermath of that, I think there was a massive amount of hype to the point where I was like rolling my eyes at a lot of it. And I think a lot of that's died down. I don't think the majority of people are using ChatGPT or AI, or if they are, it's very limited. And I think there have been a lot of really interesting use cases that have been hypothesized and brought up, but I'm not sure it's really found its perfect usage. So it's a yes and no. There's so many opportunities, there's so much value to be created and captured. But I think there was a big hype bubble, and I wouldn't say burst. I would say that we've maybe come back down to earth. And B, I still think no one has figured it out yet.
Put this in economics terms for those who stress about inflation and the
Mm.
economy crashing. We hit the soft landing for AI buzz. It's still relevant, it's still here, but it's not as hyped as it was.
What I think happened, and this may just be as subjective as to like my bubble, but a lot of people online glommed onto ChatGPT to boost their engagement on Twitter/X or LinkedIn, and they would really tie it's a money printing machine. All you have to do is take my course and whatever. And there was so much of that that it was like everywhere. And I think that's it's died down a little bit. And there's just, like I said, there's so many interesting use cases and so many interesting opportunities, especially when it comes to people that are handling customer data, facilitating the orchestration of data and insights within their organization, which obviously, if you're on RevOps, if you're an admin of your CRM, the single source of truth, you are the orchestrator there, or in a lot of places are. There's so much opportunity, and I don't think it's been fully realized. We've talked about it before. HubSpot introduced their chat bot. I think we've all agreed that it was a pilot, let's say, MVP, and hasn't gone much beyond that, which is a shame. I suspect there will be more introductions of AI natively into the system. Spend a lot of my time going down side quests where I try to think about a problem that I see on an organization and try to figure out what can I use AI, how can I use AI to solve this problem in an automated way that would be useful across the organization. And I would say like 1 out of 20 of these that I do are actually end up being useful. But it's a fantastic journey to go on.
And speaking even just for my role, artificial intelligence has helped with a lot of things that otherwise might be something that would require a lot of time, but it's not necessarily that it's something that I couldn't do. And so there are plenty of things I know that I can't do, which it can, but it's added so much value with, and this is probably going to sound like an underutilization, but an example would be having it automatically create a description of a workflow that I created. So I don't have to spend 3 to 5 minutes typing that out, thinking about it, typing it, etc. Little things like that that are high value by saving me minutes that add up, which I think make it very accessible for everyone to use. Now, a feature that HubSpot recently released to the general public is the ability to create workflows based on creating a description of what you want it to do. And candidly, I have not played with that feature much as of today. So that will potentially be something that we can talk about in a future episode. But I think that when we think about like where is AI going, that's an example of where I don't think people are going to say, "Oh, I'm using a cool AI tool in HubSpot," and they're not branding it as an AI feature, or maybe they are and I missed that. But that would be a huge example of where you can use artificial intelligence, take the text prompt, turn it into a workflow, and that is a huge value add, assuming it works like you want it to.
I think the missing piece, and if this has been released, I saw something again, I've been so many launches and betas and all these things, but the concept of chatting with your data is huge, almost to the point where that's the bubble now. Everybody's releasing chat with your PDF or chat with your whatever. Um, the ability to do that with your CRM data would be hugely valuable to be able to generate reports based on text prompts. I think I've seen hints of that coming. Those are the big ones. I think the problem I see with text to workflow is, at least for me, often it's not an inability to make the work like to put the things in place. It's more of an inability for me to conceptualize exactly what I'm trying to do, right? I could just say having to make an email flow for X, Y, and Z, but it goes beyond that. That's rarely for me the problem. It's more about, okay, here's the scenario. This is what the end result is supposed to be. What is it that this is supposed to do? And usually in those circumstances is when I pull up ChatGPT and just talk to it and have it clarify my own problems back to me, and almost always come up the answer that way.
And that's where this notion of whether or not it'll take our jobs, or in Dharmesh's words, it'll take your job but lead you to one that you love more. Um, there's always going to be a role for a strategic mind. And even if we get to the point where someone brand new could go into HubSpot, give a text prompt, have it create a workflow, you still need that mind that A can engineer the text prompt to make it do what you want it to do. So you still have to be able to think strategically. But then on the flip side, you still need to be able to quality check it. So if you're going to sit there as an admin and create workflows that don't work all day because you're using text to prompts, and then you give it to the executives and they're saying, why isn't this working? And you don't have a response, you're in trouble. There's always going to be room for admin to get better at their jobs, but these are examples of things, whether it's the generation of the description of a workflow, whether it's the creation of the workflow, these are things that meaningfully can save us time, but allow us to now focus on more strategic things like conversations around revenue operations and driving growth of the business, and all of these other things that I know many of us in as HubSpot admin like to focus on.
I think there's always going to be a human in the loop. I don't want to say always. For the foreseeable future, there's going to be a human in the loop. And what I mean by that is that the idea that there's going to be some sort of faceless machine in an office somewhere that's going to do all of our work with no humans involved, we're not there yet. I think anyone that's interacted beyond the surface level with the current AI ecosystem is very clear that doesn't happen. What is likely happening already and will continue to happen is that with AI, individuals are able to be more productive, are able to access things, information, insights that they would have previously needed internal resources for that they don't. Therefore, allowing for less headcount in a given company or hiring less, things like that. That's clearly currently the case. And to me, it's the obvious way to ensure as a human, as an individual, as a non, as an actual intelligence, not an artificial one, that you remain relevant and can actually benefit from what's happening, is to embrace it, dive into it, understand the inner workings of how this all works together. And personally, I've spent the last year like really doing that, and I have no background in programming or anything, but I didn't want to be the guy driving a horse and buggy while taxis were making all the money. And so
Right.
that's where I'm at.
And this is, I think, a really interesting segue where artificial intelligence enhances human thinking, human capability. It makes us faster. I'm curious to know, not neither of us can answer this today, but I'm curious to know how far off we are from being able to have ChatSpot loaded into an Echo Dot, and now you can just talk to Alexa about all your HubSpot data. Alexa, tell me about my reports for the day, and it spits all your info out. I'm sure a lot of our
It's
listeners don't
possible
like the
today.
privacy concerns.
That itself is possible today, right? Just to chat with your HubSpot data, in theory, ChatSpot doesn't do it, but if you were able to access the database of your HubSpot, you could, in theory, chat with it using OpenAI or Anthropic, as well as something like LangChain, and doing what they call retrieval augmented generation, which is taking a huge amount of text and data and putting it into a certain kind of database called a vector database, enabling you to chat with it. That would be possible today, and you could probably figure out how to put it onto your, have Siri access it or whatever. It's not, the average person is not able to do it, and it's not perfect, but it is possible today.
We might have some tutorial videos coming out. We'll have Nick back on, get Nico back in here, and build something. I know he built the amazing HubSpot. Oh
Yeah,
no, we can't call it HubSpot Harry, but he built his Hub Knowledge Experts, which is exactly what it is, right? It's a wonderful tool for someone that wants to ask questions about HubSpot. And I know that isn't loaded with specific data unique to a company, but certainly we could start to head in that direction with building more unique and personalized GPTs.
100%. They have GPTs that are essentially a chat for a SQL database, right? So you write it knows the kind, you give it kind of the schema of a database, and it knows SQL, and it can run queries and then convert it back to a human query HubSpot to get certain data from a contact record or a deal object or whatever. It would be a similar thing. It's totally doable. It's just someone has to build it.
We're looking at you, HubSpot. Lead the way. I think that with all of the topics that we've covered in AI is as prevalent now as it ever has been. It will continue to be a recurring theme. I know one of the themes that we've really dug into and that I tend to get pretty passionate about is the difference between HubSpot as an admin, being a HubSpot admin, and revenue operations as a role.
Mhm.
And the fact that there can be overlap, but the two aren't the same. And so I know one of the things that you and I were chatting about before this show was the need to incorporate a diverse set of intent signals to really find the information you're looking for in the noise. And as a HubSpot admin, your job is to build. And as a revenue operations professional, your job is really more to analyze. And oftentimes we end up as a HubSpot admin doing revenue operations roles. And so really we're wearing two hats in one job. Call us superheroes. But what are your thoughts as far as being able to find the data you're looking for in all the noise when there's so much data that's out there?
Yeah, there's so much data. And one of the things we talked about it before this episode that I've observed in over the last year and change is there is a lot of going into for a lot of companies behind the scenes taking external signals. So HubSpot provides these signals, right? When someone from a certain account has gone to your website, right? That's a signal. Or when someone opens an email or lands on a certain page if you have the script loaded. And there's all sorts of other signals people are using from like G2 or Bombora or 6sense and others. And so there's a ton of data that companies are kind of putting together into their CRM HubSpot on the account level to help increase the likelihood that your sales team will reach out to the right account at the right time with the right message and capitalize on intent. And the problem with that is that there's so much of it. How can you ensure that it's not overloading? When you have too much data, it's useless because there's just so much of it you don't get anything from it. But if
Right.
you don't use all of it, then you're leaving money on the table. And I think it's an iterative approach. I think if you're an admin, one of the most important things would be to include your sales team in that, right? What is it that you would want to see surfaced that would give you the best context possible about whether or not to reach out to this person or how to, or what stage they're at in their journey, in their research journey, in their purchase journey? What kind of resources do you want? Very structured templates for emails that are pre-written with very little room for you to add additional context, or do you want to be completely customized? And also understand from them, observing some of the trends they see in the people that they're talking to that are more likely to convert and try to reverse engineer that into what data points would indicate. That's an ongoing thing for, I think, a lot of companies are doing a lot of this. And I think there's AI involved in this as well.
And I would add, because I know that oftentimes in these conversations, we end up specifically talking about how this applies to sales, but this applies equally to marketing and to the service side as well. And a
100%.
really good example would be where I've been working with a company lately on their lead scoring model. And the very first thing I told them was my data is going to tell a story, but it's not going to tell the whole story. And I go in and I set up the model and I come up with the distribution curve of what the lead scoring looks like. And I can say anecdotally, this looks good. There's a healthy curve of people who have a positive score versus a negative one and the whole nine. But the next step is for you to talk to your salespeople and find out anecdotally, hey, these deals are in closed loss, but they have a great score. Why? Or this deal is in closed won and it has a terrible score. Why? And some of that we can look at the data and we can piece those answers together. But I think that when teams are afraid to talk to their people and they're relying solely on data, that's a really dangerous position to be in. And so all of that is to say artificial intelligence and human intelligence of data analytics, um, it only goes so far. And at some point, it becomes so much more helpful to just sit down and start asking these questions directly. Needless to say, that has its own challenges, right? And you're pulling people off the floor, you're taking up time, it's resources, but at the end of the day, you don't want to be building your entire ecosystem off of just the data.
No, that's, I think, in any system, a heavily top-down approach that doesn't take into account the individuals in the system that are essentially going to
Hmm.
be the ones that are most impacted by it is doomed to fail because you are superimposing your model of how people actually work onto them when that's very not what's happening, right? You can have all the data in the world, but there are things that you will miss if you don't talk to the people that are your end user, in this scenario, internal end users. You could be textbook about everything, and then there's something very dumb that you're missing because you just didn't
Right.
observe, you didn't talk. And it's as important as any other data point.
And even data aside, this is actually a really interesting conversation around just process where as HubSpot admin, as revenue operations professionals, oftentimes we roll something out and there's a saying that many of us have, which is our job is to protect companies from themselves. Especially that becomes more true where a lot of times companies hire X number of people as sales reps, as marketing professionals, and after time you build more and more trust with somebody, but especially if somebody's ramping up and they're learning processes, maybe they don't even know that they're not following a process. So our job is oftentimes to protect people from themselves. But when processes aren't followed, it's not always because someone is trying to take a shortcut and the rep just wanted the deal and closed one. Oftentimes it's because we missed something in terms of process that it made sense intuitively that they're going to do A, B, C. And in reality, they did A, B, went back to A, went to C, and that broke everything because they jumped back a step. So I think it's so important to not be afraid to talk to your people and to not be mad when they break something because I know so many times somebody doesn't follow a process, it creates a deal that wasn't supposed to be created, a value is wrong, and then we say the sales rep wasn't listening. Um, and our
Yeah,
job is to mitigate that, but oftentimes it's not malicious, and if it is, that's a different conversation.
definitely. I don't think not malicious. It's often that the person, the end user, let's say a sales rep in this scenario, is probably a more efficient way for them to work. And had you spent the time talking or observing, you probably would have seen it and taken it into account in the model. And so I think it's super important.
Yeah. And I'll say it all day long. Talking to your people is something that is beneficial at the beginning of the process, but I also know because I do this all day, every day, that there are limitations to that as well, right? You can't sit down with every sales rep going into building every process and say, hey, we're planning on doing this. How is that going to affect your day to day? At some point, there's going to be a level of we built it, we're rolling it out. something broke and now we have to fix it. And that's just the trade-off.
Mhm.
You could spend more time doing more planning, more due diligence, but it's typically more efficient to roll it out, let something break, and fix it. And just understand that's part of the process. Things break and things need to be fixed. And as long as you are here to be a helpful HubSpot admin, which I know we all are, then you go back, you fix it, and everything continues to work.
Yeah, agreed.
So, with that in mind, I know that we've covered just so many topics since really we've started this podcast, and we've had so many different guests on. One of the things that we are working to continue to do is elevate the types of content that we promote in terms of bringing both high level theoretical discussion around HubSpot admin, as well as specific granular things like specific workflows. Or again, we had Nico showing us how to build a GPT essentially live on the air. But Mark, I'm curious to hear from you because I know that you have conversations with people across different ecosystems. And again, you've got your own podcast. What are some of the things that have really been coming up with revenue operations professionals or things that you've been hearing in the community that has been hot topic lately?
Yeah. So one of the things that I've been seeing a lot, and I don't think this is necessarily a surprise to anyone, is that there's a lot of consolidation. I think that in larger companies and even small startups, I think I observed this when I worked at 10-person startups. There was a willingness for companies to allow every individual contributor to get to choose their point solution, their little tool to help them do their thing. And budgets were loose. There have been considerable budget restraints. And I think beyond the headcount reductions that we've all observed over the last 2 years, or whatever it's been, a lot of a lot of the cutting of budgets went to consolidate tech stacks, get rid of a lot of those smaller, usually earlier stage product point solutions, and consolidate into a source of truth, almost always centered around the CRM as being the kind of major hub, so to speak. And so this is happening, I think, broadly across companies. I had a conversation with somebody this week who's at Miro, which is obviously a humongous company, and he observed it very keenly. He was saying something like there was some statistic he had come across, I think, broadly, that in the sales organization alone, on average, there were 12 to 16 tools being used. And so often that's the case because the main tool, let's say CRM, wasn't purpose built for this thing. It can get you like 80% of the way there, but people wanted that like specific solution. And those are being cut now. And so the unique position it puts someone in revenue operations, somebody who's the admin of the CRM, is it's an opportunity to add additional value by seeing how you can take this product that you have, this your single source of truth, your kind of main tool that everyone kind of plugs into, and how do you make up for that 20% missing for the functionality that this person is looking for? What can you do to add? What kind of customizations or integrations or internal tooling or whatever can you do to help get that person to the additional 20% that they need? That's where somebody can think outside the box, who's scrappy, can really set themselves apart and say, I know we got rid of whatever tool it was that you were using for your email sequences because it could do XYZ that you couldn't get from the native sequences in HubSpot. But I went ahead and using a private app, created some sort of integration for us that'll actually fill the gap for you. Let me know what you think. And that I think is the opportunity for people to set themselves apart and go above and beyond. And I think it's a very exciting opportunity because, again, there are going to be a lot of problems that don't reach the threshold of company-wide, we need to solve this, but are still problems for different individuals that with a little elbow grease and some learning, you can be the hero. And so I find that exciting. I try to embody that as well when I observe a challenge in the organization that it's clear that it's never going to reached the level of where it's like a company-wide problem and they're really going to put budget towards it. But to me, I can see the pain. I always take an hour out of my day to think through that problem, put myself in the shoes of the person in our organization that's dealing with that problem, and try to figure out in the limited tool set, tech stack that we have today, is there something I can help them automate, something I can add with my limited knowledge set that can solve this problem? And I think that's super, to me, that's like the most exciting part of everything we do.
Yeah, and I think that brings a really interesting notion where as HubSpot admin, oftentimes we are piecing together puzzle pieces with what we're given. And I know that the question has come up in the Sprocketeer community a few times, like, can HubSpot do this? The answer is almost always yes, but you might need to upgrade your tier or find an external solution, right? You can't do everything on the free plan. You just can't. And that makes sense. It's by nature. HubSpot's a business, and that's why they have different tiers. But at the same time, there can be non-intuitive ways to achieve things depending on what the goal is. And so, an example of something that I worked on recently would be where someone didn't want their team to use the native line items feature in HubSpot for a variety of reasons, but they wanted to be able to break down a deal to see what services would contribute into the amount of that deal. And they didn't care about start date of each service line and all that. So the non-intuitive solution is let's build deal properties. We can have those filter into the amount. And then on the flip side, we can report on that on the back end. And that would be an example of something that really didn't even need a third party solution. It didn't need any custom code. It was actually a fairly simple way to achieve what was being asked. And now we have essentially basic line item functionality living on the deal property. So we don't even have to add a new layer with a new object that is being trained on. And so I think that what's interesting is that HubSpot admin and revenue operations professionals, oftentimes as analytical as we are, our role involves us being very creative with coming up to solutions. Unless you have an executive team that's just telling you what to build all day, maybe you get to be less creative. But if you're in that position, just know there are creative minds out there, and we want you to be creative.
Yeah, and this is we actually I know this comes up a lot in our conversations with folks about the challenge of somebody who within their organization they're basically expected to just take orders and not have input or help problem solve. They're given instructions, detailed instructions, do XYZ, do it like this is the final result. And how do you break out of it? I think to me, the luckily, thank God, I've worked in a company that at least in my role, they support and nurture that creativity. And but I think that idea of observing problems that may not have ever person may not have come to you, but observing it, taking some small portion of your day each day to think through some of those problems and how you could potentially solve those problems and actually proactively approach with, hey, I think I might be able to help here. When you do that enough, you're then known, people will come to you and ask for your creativity. I think that is a way to earn their respect and trust in that.
Yeah, I would agree with that. And I'm going to misquote here, but they say it's similar to dress for the job you want, not the job you're in. And the same thing applies to
Yeah.
your roles and responsibilities. No quiet quitting was a big thing a few years back, and I think,
I never believed that was really a thing.
yeah.
I swear that
Um,
was like some great conspiracy by the newspapers. Anyways.
so act for the job you want, not the job. And if you're a HubSpot admin who's just taking orders, but you want to move up in your career and move up the ladder, so to speak, then you're going to have to be more strategic at some point. And so if you're not given the capacity to do that, Mark, to your point, As an admin, you've just got to find the problems that aren't already being asked of and come up with the solutions. And I would even add a notion that it is a far more risky place to be in a role where you are only building, because you can't tell an executive after you built something, well, your plan was bad
Yeah.
and I built it, you said, oops. After you build it, like, you're responsible for it. And so if you aren't empowered to challenge the thought process before you start working on something, then it's just going to cause problems downstream. And so I would encourage anybody who is in a situation where you're just building stuff all day and you want to be more strategic, flip the script and start to be more strategic then, but just make sure that you bring an opinion to the table.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. And I think to piggyback on what you were saying, there's this idea of faith without works is dead, right? So you can have aspirations to be in a role that has more of a strategic element to it, or a more senior role or whatever. But if you just sit around all day daydreaming and being irritated that you're not there, but not doing anything to help get yourself there, nothing changes if nothing changes. I think this way of stepping up, identifying problems that haven't risen to the level of company-wide problems and no one's really taken any sort of steps to solve them. And there are many of them everywhere. I observe them in my company all the time. I see it in Slack conversations, and I'll message the person, hey, I noticed that X, Y, and Z. Would it be beneficial if I tried to put some sort of something together that might help you? I think I have an idea of I can connect this and I can then surface it to you this way. And then we don't have to go through that extra step that is really frustrating for you.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And being a HubSpot admin and being a revenue operations professional is a really unique position at a company because we're not in the C suite. We're also not regarded as like the marketing professional or the sales rep. And so there's this really interesting place in the organization, really between that executive level and then between everyone else. And that allows us to talk to both parties. And so I think that what then ends up happening is, if you really enjoy your role and you really go back to that first topic that we talked about in this show, which was talking to your people, it should empower you to then go and ask sales reps, what are challenges that you're facing? I love when sales reps and marketing professionals and success professionals, I love when they bring me their challenges and their problems and the things that they are battling with, because I see those as areas of opportunity to make things more efficient. And anything that I can do to improve their efficiency helps the executive team. And so oftentimes you don't have someone in success saying, hey, it would be going to the executive team and saying, hey, it would be more efficient if I had an email that did this. On the flip side, they might go to their manager and say that. And if the manager is not a HubSpot admin, it's probably going to die there. As a HubSpot admin, we're in a really interesting position to be able to talk to everybody and help efficiency across the organization, both at an executive level and at an individual level. So I am a huge proponent of asking for wish lists. Ask people what they want done, and you don't have to do it tomorrow, but if you have a slower week because you've achieved some big epics or some big projects and now you have a lag time before the next one starts, or the case may be, the time to attack that wish list, that's always going to bring some incremental improvements.
Yeah, and always look at something like that as a new learning experience that you can put on your or on that you can rely on as you're growing your career. If you are the admin for Sales Hub and your company is going to be expanding to Service Hub, and there's tasks to be done there, and no one really has experience with it, raise your hand. Say, I'll take this on because it's an opportunity. That is experience that can be leveraged in the future. That'll be an asset that is incredibly valuable. And that it happens with every kind of little thing that you do. Always look at new tasks, novel challenges, something that you can now bank on in the future as something you have experience with.
And the only flip side to all of this is companies that want to get all of the juice from the lemon
Yeah.
and then it's squeezed and you got to get a new lemon. So that is to say, for those who aren't following on the analogy there,
Burnout.
burnout. If you as a professional are battling with burnout, there are things that you can do to help to mitigate it. And this is going to be somewhat dependent on company culture. And Mark, it's probably a conversation we'll dive into at length in a future episode. But I would just add that as a HubSpot admin, it's not your job to do everything overnight. If you are in a company culture where that's really the expectation is you're doing all the big picture things, you're also getting a million and one requests every single day, then come up with a system that allows for accountability with the requests coming in and how that's going to impact other things that you'd be working on. Emerson released a wonderful solution that involves using Slack and emojis, and then he built it in Make. If you're battling burnout, I encourage you to check out the Sprocketeer community because he posted a really good solution
Yeah.
for taking requests.
Yeah. And I realize that I often skate somewhat close to the edge of burnout, and not because it's forced on me. It's just I think it's somewhere where I tend to operate. But I've been on the other end of it where I've fully into burnout, and that was a result of unrealistic expectations. And so I know what that's like. All I can say is that it's a difficult situation. One, I'm very grateful that my current company does not put me in.
Got to be careful. Icarus flew too close to the sun and lost his wings.
That's right.
Mark, as always, I love when we get to do these each week.
Yeah.
And this was a great conversation, just really capping off on we've been talking about for the past 23 episodes. We're coming up episode 25. That means that we're not too far off from a year into this. So
Maybe we'll
thank you as
record
always.
maybe we'll record it live together because I might be in Austin next week.
That's right, coming up. So we may have a special live episode with Mark and I in person. Stay tuned for that.
All
We do
right.
these Friday, typically at 10:30 Central, but can vary. And notes for those who are HubSpot admin and are not in Sprocketeer group, check us out
Quite nice.
in Slack, link in the show notes. Also, check out our friends Deanna Galoff Hug Tuesdays at 10 a.m. Central. And if you're interested in checking out additional Sprocket Pod, all of the recorded, they're on. Check us out there. Very much. Everyone else, Sprocket on.
Weekend, everybody.